Chapter 2. Man as finite or ordinary individual. It is no more a question of reviving the interminable combat between philosophy and the sciences of man than it is of making man exit from the enclosure they form together through their very conflict. It is rather a question of showing that man never entered this enclosure, that this conflict is none of his business, save through a unitary hallucination whose mechanism will have to be analyzed, that he is determined and completed straightaway and absolutely precedes the phantasms of anthropological parallelism. If philosophy is an anthropo or an andro-eidetic, we must systematically contrast what we call ordinary man, who draws an inalienable essence from himself, which above all does not mean that he is a causa sui to the philosophical android or anthropoid, that is to say, to homo ex machina, a part of the philosophical machine, a part of being, of desire, of the state, of language, etc. Man, through his real essence, is not visible within the horizon of these presuppositions, which are those of the sciences of man as well. Anthropology simulates him, magically gives rise to him. It is not yet the science of man. Anthropological difference is not man, it is his transcendent avatar in the world. If the essence of man is not a difference, something like an undecidable decision, it is the radical subject of an ordeal that, far from alienating him, is finite or holds him in himself and prevents him from ever leaving himself. Ordinary man is inalienable, and this distinguishes him from his projections on the anthropological screen, which are inconsistent, unreal, and doomed to history. Man is the real object of a science as soon as he is recognized in his specificity, irreducible to the objects of other sciences, and in his reality rather than in the mere possibility of his figures. This is a single twofold requirement, which can be nuanced later, though it does not suffer from this in its principles and its foundations are undivided. Each science has its own way of sending the old unitary ideal of totality into retreat, and the rigorous science of individuals has its own. It requires, in an ultimately radical way, that the whole and its modes, the universal or authoritarian predicates, not be all, that man be straightway outside whole, or that he introduce into the world, or rather outside of the world, a duality of which the world, the whole, and their attributes are only one of the sides. For the science of man to become a reality, man must stop being unitarily enclosed in totalities or unities, and the real relations among the sciences must cease to be confused with Greco philosophical forms of unity, which are utterly mythological. To see the reality rather than the mere possibility of man, it is necessary to abandon the unitary or Greco Occidental paradigm, which pervades almost all of philosophy up to its contemporary deconstructions, along with all of its prejudices. Man is not and has never been an object visible in the Greco unitary horizon, even in the anthropological territory of this horizon. It is useless to renew or deconstruct metaphysics. What is necessary is to change the paradigm of thinking, to move from a philosophical paradigm, from being to difference, from the same to the other, to a paradigm we call minoritarian or individual, which is based on a transcendental but finite experience of the one as distinct from being, the world, and their attributes. The distinction of the individual and the individual is the foundation of a non empirical, non worldly, non historical, non linguistic, non sexual, etc., but transcendental science of individuals or of ordinary man. Whereas the individual is always also universal, the individual, l'individual, is the individual, l'individu, without remainder or excess, the nothing but individual, who a priori precedes all forms of universality. The individual problematic is thus based in a thought of the one rather than a thought of being. Being, but also difference, and the games of the same and the other are always unitary, and in addition to their own difficulties, are incapable of doing man justice. Instead of rendering him visible, they are satisfied with the substitute of an anthropology, or, which is not at all that different, of a unitary critique of anthropology. We propose to break the alliance of man and the authoritarian predicates desire, language, sex, power, the state, history, etc., that lead to sciences that are not those of man, to break the alliance of man and philosopher, master of predicates. The hypothesis and even the paradigm must be changed. Break the mixtures, base philosophy on man rather than the inverse. Attempt a history of the human existent that would no longer owe anything to unitary prejudices. A biography of the solitary man, bachelor of the world, of faith, of techniques, of language, and even of philosophy. But this man, it will be objected, does he exist? Does he exist in any form that is not residual and epiphenomenal? Is there a proper and primitive essence of man, one that would not be an attribute of something else? The human in man is not reducible to the sum of his predicates: the living, the speaking, the acting, the historical, the sexuated, the economic, the juridical, etc. The philosophizing, however, these predicates are calculated. This is possible man, not real man. Real man is subject, nothing but subject. But the subject here also is not a special predicate. It is a subject that has never been a predicate and that no longer needs predicates in general, that is, straightaway inherent to itself or a sufficiently determined essence. The essence of man remains in the one, that is, in the inherence that is non positional of itself, in a nothing but subject or an absolute as subject, that is, a finitude. As a matter of principle, which will be explained later, we identify the absolute with finitude. We identify the absolute with finitude rather than with an infinite totality. Individuals are real prior to totality. They are not modes of a substance, and they are not even understandable starting from infinite and universal attributes: language, life, history, sexuality, economy, etc. It is useless to wonder if these predicates are included analytically or synthetically in the subject man, or if man is the difference of himself and language, anthropo-linguistic / logical difference of himself and sexuality, etc. As we understand it, man is ordinary in a positive sense. He is not a residual and shifting figure of philosophy or of the Greek episteme, but rather is determined before these and absolutely precedes the philosophical calculation of predicates, inasmuch as they are taken one by one. Ordinary man is devoid of qualities or attributes through a completely positive sufficiency. He lacks nothing, not even philosophy. But being devoid of predicates does not mean that he is devoid of essence. To the contrary, this is man as he takes his essence from himself, or more precisely, immediately from his essence, without it having been an attribute beforehand. He does not take his essence from history, from biology, from the state, from philosophy. There is no pejorative or minorative note in this ordinary or this minoritarian. I am a sufficient solitude, too far below solipsism to have to extricate myself from it. I am not a cogito, a relation to a site or to an other. I am out of the question. No question of man, no ontic or ontological primacy of the question of man. I do not find my essence in my existence or in my questions. I experience my subjective essence before these questions. I am the beginning of my life and my thought. And if in this way I exclude the question and the mise en abîme from my essence, that is because my essence and essence in general is defined by characteristics that are absolutely original, primitive, internal, and without equivalence in the world, through the one or the unreflective. There is a question of being, but the one is out of the question. It is the structures of this ordinary man that we will describe here. Individual structures, invisible to the light of reason or intelligence. They are not ideal essences but finite, inalienable, and thus indisputable lived experiences. Individual structures of the essence of man are describable outside of all anthropological prejudice, that is, outside of all Greek philosophical rationality. Only these individual or finite determinations grant man something other than a mere possibility, a specific and determined reality. They render possible a science of his relations to the world, to history, to language, relations that are not at all those hallucinated by the social sciences. This is the meaning of this biography of ordinary man, a rigorous description of the most general experiences that govern the relation of individuals as such to history, to the state, to economy, to language, etc. The text of this science is thus no longer the cogito and its membra disjecta, which the human sciences divide among themselves. It is the irreducible individual kernel that must be extracted from the cogito in which it is still enclosed and concealed. But we no longer conceive of this extraction as a philosophical operation because it is actually an immediate given, which we here merely render perceptible, sensibilize. The foundation of a science of man entails, first of all, creating a non philosophical affect, rendering perceptible the immediate givens, the non hallucinatory reality, the finite transcendental experience in man. The finite transcendental experience in man. It requires taking this step, without which unitary anthropology will continue to enthrall us with its tricks. Though the immediate givens of man undoubtedly do not make up the entirety of his relations to his predicates and their unity, the world or philosophy, they nevertheless are the rock that allows the scientific description of his relations. The immediate givens of man are first, but they do not, of course, exhaust this science of people and of their relations. The phenomenal givens of this science and its only text is the one. But precisely because it is the one, it is not unique. The one is not, above all, is not. Unity or the unitary ideal that still reigns in the cogito and leaves its essence indeterminate. The complete text of the science of man is double or dual rather than dual, just as it is individual rather than individual. The one and the world, minorities and authorities, individuals and history, the state, language, etc. This is not strictly speaking a humanity principle whose statue we would try to erect beside or beyond the power principle, the language principle, the pleasure principle. Under the name of ordinary man, we refrain from flattering the slaves of the cave, or, for example, providing a defense of the sheep against the eagles. Instead, we describe a real essence of man before the animal difference of eagles and sheep, which the philosophers want us to believe belongs to man and to his becoming. And ordinary man is likewise not the antidote to superior man, that is, to the overman. He is neither the hero of the future nor the latest archaeological find. Rather, it is against this heroic and agonistic conception of man passed down to us by the Greeks, which casts a new light under the names of difference, difference, and differend, that we attempt to make visible man without a face and without qualities. This is a treatise of the solitudes.